Hello, and
Hola,
thank you for
muchas
inviting me.
gracias
Thank you for that introduction.
por esta presentación.
I'd like to start
Me gustaría comenzar
by introducing the next speaker.
presentando al siguiente orador.
Please say hello to
Por
my
favor,
friend
saluden a
Kevin.
mi amigo, díganle hola.
Oh my God!
Oh, Dios mío.
Where is this?
Ah, ¿qué es esto? No estoy acostumbrado
This
a
is
esto.
a lecture.
Es una conferencia.
Again?
Nuevamente, otra vez.
What am I doing here?
¿Pero qué estoy haciendo yo acá?
Kevin,
Kevin.
you helped me make a very important
Tú
point.
me estás ayudando a
cool.
plantear cosas interesantes.
What's that?
¿Y
Well,
de qué se trata?
It's a point about
Se
social
trata
perception.
de la percepción
See,
social, es decir,
people in the
la
audience
gente en la
look at you and
audiencia
they
te está mirando
perceive
y
awareness.
están percibiendo algo de
Yes,
conciencia.
and that
Entonces,
perception is
La
automatic.
percepción
We
es
can't
una
help
cuestión
it.
automática, no la podemos
just
evitar.
looks like you're conscious of the world around you. But at the same time, the interesting thing is that intellectually, we know it's not true. It's a social illusion. We know that you don't have a brain.
What?
Yes, I do. No, you don't.
Dude, check it yourself.
How would I check that?
Just stick your other hand in my back and feel around.
Really?
Yeah, go ahead. Just pretend you're a proctologist.
Okay.
Yeah. Ow!
Sorry.
Yeah, that's it.
Kevin, your brain is detached from your body.
Well, you took it out. Jerk.
Okay. I think it's time to put you away so I can get on with my talk.
What? Oh, man.
Yes.
No, wait. No, don't.
I'll put his brain back in. I started to learn ventriloquism when my son was 3. It was a perfect age. He was too young to know how bad I was. I used to make his stuffed animals talk. And as I got better, I began to realize something scientifically profound. The brain contains machinery that allows us to attribute awareness to Kevin. But we didn't evolve that machinery to enjoy ventriloquism. People are social animals, and we do the same thing to each other. We attribute consciousness to each other. When I talk to another person, I have an automatic impression of thoughts and awareness and emotions emanating from that person. Of course, that's not the person's real mind. That's my brain generating a handy model of a mind and projecting that onto that person. See, whenever 2 people meet, there's really 4 people present. There's me, there's the version of you that I construct and project onto you. There's you, and there's the version of me that you construct. So that's for sometimes very different people. And we do the same thing to more than just people. We attribute awareness to our pet cats and dogs. That's reasonable. Some people swear that their houseplants are conscious. The other day I got mad at my computer. So I'm not talking about intellectually figuring out whether something has a mind and what might be in that mind. We do that too. But I'm talking about that automatic gut certainty that is often wrong, that awareness is emanating from something. And there's another obvious example. I attribute awareness to myself with the same gut certainty. So maybe it's all one thing. We attribute awareness to puppets and to people and to ourselves with the same machinery in the brain. Maybe there's one unifying explanation for the whole range of spirit stuff. The brain constructs simplified social models of minds and uses those to help understand itself and others. See, these are the profound insights that come from talking to stuffed animals. And it's also how I began my scientific work on consciousness. For 30 years, I studied basic issues in neuroscience, how the brain processes sensory input, how it controls movement. And that background turned out to be useful in building a scientific theory of consciousness. I should say a theory of subjective experience. Why is it that we don't just process information like a standard computer, but we also claim to have a subjective experience of doing it? For the last 5 or so years, my lab has been outlining what we call the attention schema theory. And I'll build it up gradually so you get the basic idea. But for a more complete sense of the theory, I point you to my book, Consciousness and the Social Brain. A little while ago, I applied to a grant and to fund some of the experiments in my lab. And the application had a question: how do I think my work relates or compares to the most prominent work in the last 5 years, and again in the last 10 years? So I wrote, I think the work in my lab is the most important work in the last 4 billion years. And they were not amused. I didn't get the grant. But joking aside, a part of me actually believes that. And I'll explain to you why. About 4 billion years ago, non-living chemistry transitioned into life. And a second major transition is happening right now in our own time, the creation of artificial intelligence that is potentially trillions of times smarter than any human has ever been. And more than that, we're moving toward a technology that can take consciousness, the human mind, and migrate it from a brain to an artificial device. Think about that. A person's thoughts and personality, emotions and memories, a person's wisdom and skill set can potentially live indefinitely, able to contribute to society for thousands of years. Think what that would do to cultural turnover. Think what that would do to the accumulation of progress in science or art or politics. Think what that would do to the colonization of space. We are not a spacefaring species, and it's hard to imagine how we can be. Our bodies are fragile. We need atmosphere. cosmic rays are toxic to us and they're almost impossible to filter out. Even if we could build a perfect, safe spaceship environment, we don't live long enough to go anywhere interesting. The fastest rockets today would take about 20,000 years to reach the nearest star, Alpha Centauri. But all those problems are solved if we can take the most human part of us, the essence, the mind, and migrate it to an artificial platform and send it into space. We could have whole colonies of people's minds keeping each other company, living in a simulated house, sent off on expeditions to explore this or that part of the galaxy with no intrinsic limit. The only way we will become a spacefaring civilization is not by building an artificial environment that you can put a person's body in, but building an artificial platform that can carry a human mind. It's an incredible future. It's a new phase of existence. But that future has hit a wall right now. No matter how complicated our artificial gadgets are right now, if we don't understand what consciousness is, if we don't understand the basics of how to engineer it, that future is denied. It's not going to happen. But I think now, finally, we have a grasp on what consciousness is and the basics of how to engineer it. And so that's why I think that the work in my lab and other labs, this general area of research on the scientific and mechanistic basis of consciousness is the crucial ingredient in the most important transition in the last 4 billion years. So I wasn't even joking on my grant application. So to tell you about the work that we've been doing to try to understand the mechanistic basis of consciousness, I'll start with that deceptively simple question: how can we build artificial consciousness? All right, that's a robot looking at an apple. And we're going to design a brain for it. This is a build-a-brain project. And we want to know what to build into that brain to make it insist that it has a subjective, conscious experience of the apple. What information should we put in that brain? Well, first, information about the apple. Light enters the eye, is transduced into neural signals. Neurons process that information and build up a description of the apple. I don't mean literally a picture of an apple in the head. Obviously, that's just a slide. I mean the brain constructs information such as color, shape, size, location. It's like a dossier, a set of information that is constantly changing as new signals come in. This is sometimes called an internal model. It's like a simulation of the apple. And the simulation is not accurate. Well, it'd be a waste of energy and a waste of processing resources for the brain to construct a really detailed, scientifically accurate description of the apple. Color's a good example. In reality, the apple has a reflectance spectrum, which is very, very complicated. The eyes and the brain simplify that into the property of color. Color is a construct of the brain. It's a caricature. It's a simplified proxy for reality. And it's good enough for survival. And this is a fundamental truth of the brain, that the brain constructs simplified models of things in its world. And everything we know about the world and about ourselves comes through those simplified models. Now, let's delve deeper. You rarely look at an apple in isolation. There's probably other things there. A plate, a table, a wall behind them. Too many things for the brain to process in depth all at the same time. It has to prioritize. And at this moment, this brain is focusing resources on the apple. That focus is called attention. I don't like the word attention. It has too many colloquial connotations. I mean something mechanistic, selective signal enhancement. The apple signal is enhanced. Other visual signals are pressed down. This happens because signals in the brain compete with each other. The apple signal wins the competition of the moment, and as a result, that internal model can rise up in signal strength and dominate the brain's processes. That's what I mean by attention. When I use the word attention, I mean only this. The brain processes stuff, and it has a focused style of doing so. And nothing here is mysterious. If we had a camera and a computer, we could build this. And people have. People have built systems just like this. Artificial systems that can focus attention, visual attention, on an apple. But is it aware of the apple? In one sense, there's a concept of objective awareness, which just means that the information got in and is being processed. Yes, the machine is objectively aware of the apple. But is it subjectively aware? Does it have a subjective conscious experience the same way all of us do? And even at that, some people would say yes. Subjective visual awareness arises from visual processing. It just inevitably arises. And if that's true, then we're done. We just built a conscious machine. And consciousness remains totally unexplained. It's just a big magical mystery. But I don't think we're done. And to make that point, let's ask the machine a question. As long as we're doing a build-a-brain thought experiment, we might as well build in a linguistic interface. We can ask it questions. It's like a search engine. It's like Siri. You ask it a question, it searches the available database, and then it answers the question. So we ask it, what's there? It says, an apple. We ask, what are the properties of the apple? It says, oh, it's red, it's round, it's at that location. It can say that because it contains that information. And this diagram could serve as a summary of a whole category of theories of consciousness. Like the higher order thought theory, for example. This linguistic interface is like the higher order thought that has access to a lower order representation. But I don't think this diagram by itself captures a complete account of consciousness. And to make that point, let's ask another question. We ask the machine, are you aware of the apple? And it says, cannot compute. Well, why? That search engine searches the database and it finds no relevant information. Well, plenty of information about an apple, none about awareness. No information about what awareness is or whether it has any. And no information about the self either, right? We ask, are you aware of the apple? It doesn't even have information on what this you is. It's like asking your digital camera, are you aware of the picture? Well, it doesn't compute in that domain. But we can fix that. Let's add to the Build-A-Brain. We'll add a second internal model and see if we can do any better. A model of the self. Again, this is information put together in the brain. It might include information about the physical shape and structure of the body, the so-called body schema. It might include autobiographical memories, which play a huge role in the self model. We know the brain contains something like a self model, probably very complicated, probably spans many brain areas. Well, now let's ask our machine another question. We ask, tell us about yourself. And now it can answer. It's been given that construct of self. And so it says, I'm a person. I'm standing right here. I'm this tall. I'm this wide. I can move. I grew up in Buffalo. I'm a nice guy. You know, whatever information is available in its internal model, it can report. And again, this diagram could represent a whole category of theory about consciousness. Theories in which consciousness is self-knowledge. There's a lot of theories like that. And we've given our machine a lot of self-knowledge. But I would argue this diagram is still not a complete account of consciousness. And to make that point, let's ask another question. We ask the machine, what's the mental relationship between you and the apple? And the machine, well, that search engine searches the database, and it finds no answer. The machine has plenty of information about an apple, plenty of separate information about the self, but no information about a mental relationship between them, no information about what a mental relationship is. It can't even parse the question. Equipped only with this, our machine fails the test yet again. Well, let's try one more time. We'll add one more internal model. See, the advantage of internal models is that they model things in the real world that are useful to monitor and predict. So you have a real apple and an internal model of the apple, a real self, an internal model of the self. But there's a third component to this scene that's less obvious, it's more intangible. It's the computational relationship between the two. The self is focusing resources on the apple. It's attending to the apple. So why not include an internal model of that attentional relationship? See, now the machine has a complete description of this moment in its world. But what kind of information would be included in an internal model of attention? How would it describe attention? Presumably, like the internal model of the apple, it would include useful general information, but not microscopic details. For example, it might describe attention as like a mental possession of something. Now, notice this is a very vague description, but it does capture the essence of what attention is. It might describe attention as something that empowers me to react to objects. That is definitely a property, definitely a consequence of attention. It might describe attention as something located inside of me. And it might describe many other general properties of attention. But this internal model, this bundle of information, would not contain information about neurons or synapses or competing electrochemical signals, the microscopic nuts and bolts that the brain does not need to know about. This internal model would be silent on the physical basis of attention. So now let's ask our machine a question. We ask, what's the mental relationship between you and the apple? Well, the search engine searches the database And on that basis, it says, I have a mental possession of the apple. Interesting. We probe deeper. We ask the machine, well, tell us more about this mental possession. What are its physical properties? Well, first we ask the machine, do you know what physical properties are? And the machine says yes. It can say that because it has a body schema that describes a physical body. It has an internal model of the apple that describes a physical apple. So it says, yes, I know what physical properties are, but my mental possession of the apple, the mental possession in and of itself has no describable physical properties. It just is. It's non-physical. In that sense, it's metaphysical. But it does have a physical location. It's located inside me. It's a part of me. Like my arms and legs are physical parts of me, I also have a metaphysical part. It's the part that has a mental grasp of things. It enables me to know and understand things. It enables me to choose to react to things, to remember things. I don't just process that the apple is red. I have a mental possession of the redness. It's saying it has consciousness. And the kind of consciousness it claims to have is very similar to the consciousness all of us claim to have. Well, we probe a little deeper and we say, oh, come on, you're just a machine. And you're saying all that because that's the information in your internal models. Of course, you're going to spew out all that. We understand that you're not giving superficial answers. It's not superficial knowledge. Instead, it's deeper model-based knowledge. And that allows you to give flexible and rich answers to these questions. But still, you're just a machine reporting the information you contain. Well, the machine accesses that information, those internal models, and it finds nothing that matches that description. Remember, the models don't describe how the machine actually works. So the machine says, on the basis of the information available to it, it says, what internal models? What computation? What information? No. Simply, there's a me, there's a shiny red apple, and I am aware of the apple. So this theory explains why the brain is unlikely to believe the theory. It's stuck in a logic loop. It's captive to its own internal information. Well, the apple is a little bit limiting, but the same logic could apply to anything. Awareness of a sound, or awareness of any other sensory event. Awareness of a memory of something that happened yesterday. Awareness of the thought 2 + 2 = 4. Awareness of yourself. This diagram shows how a brain could insist, I am aware of X. Now, so far, the theory sounds very cognitive. The brain insists, the brain reports. But this theory works just as well if you take out that cognitive linguistic interface. Remember, we added that as a convenience to be able to talk to the machine. But suppose you're a rat. You're a rat. And you probably have some cognition, but you lack language. You still have those internal models. Those are deep, fundamental representations of important things, representations of self, representations of items in your world, and a representation of that ever-present process of attention, the relationship between the two. You need those internal models. You need those representations to understand and predict and navigate your world. In this theory, the brain constructs an overarching simulation of its world. And in that simulation, you are conscious of stuff. And the brain can construct this simulation even if it's not human, even if it's a rat or some other kind of creature that lacks the sophistication to talk about it. Okay, that is the attention schema theory. People talk about the hard problem of consciousness, and it is hard. It's presumably impossible to explain how a physical brain can produce a non-physical essence. But it turns out to be easy to explain how a machine can claim to have a magical essence, and how it can't tell the difference. It can't tell that what it's doing is data processing. So at this point, people get mad. They say, how dare you replace the soul with this simplistic mechanism? But I think it's the other way around. I think the construct of soul is the simplification. I like to say that the mind is a trillion-stranded sculpture made out of information. It's constantly changing. It's gorgeously complicated. Everything you know, everything you believe, derives ultimately from that information. And one part of that information is a very simplified model of yourself and how you process your world. So now we have a rational, mechanistic way to understand consciousness. The most common alternative perspectives on consciousness are really a kind of magical thinking. The idea that consciousness inevitably arises if you build something complicated enough. But that's not very helpful to engineers. When the Wright brothers were trying to build the first airplane, if you said to them, just build a machine as complicated as you can, and flight will naturally emerge, I don't think that would have been super helpful. You have to engineer the machine to fly. But can we actually build this? Can we actually build a machine that is conscious in this sense that, just like us, it claims to be conscious, it insists it's conscious, it introspects, meaning cognitive machinery accesses deeper information, and on that basis it learns that it's conscious, and it uses all that to help understand itself and its relation to the world. Can we build that? I think the answer is yes. We will have conscious machines, maybe even in the next decade. I think that it will make computers easier for people to interact with. It's like a social user interface. And no, I don't think it will make machines any more likely to take over the world and kill us all. I think machines can kill us just as well without the consciousness part. But it does raise an important question. Why? What's the practical benefit of adding this to a machine? And that's not just an engineering question. It's also an evolutionary question. Why would people have evolved an attention schema in the first place? And I'm going to trim a few slides off the end of my talk so that we have a little more time for questions. But I'm going to give you a very brief run through of some of the ways an attention schema might be useful. First, of course, like I said, it's part of a general representation. The brain needs a general description of its world so that it can navigate its world. And the attention schema is a part of that general description. Second, it may be important for integrating together really different kinds of information. Here, you see that attention schema linking information about yourself with information about the outside world, about an apple, or about a million other possible things. So an attention schema could be helpful in pulling together information from many different kinds of domains. An attention schema might be useful for controlling attention. One of the most important principles in engineering is that if you want a system to control something, the system should have an internal model of the thing to be controlled. A self-driving car needs an internal model of the car, a set of information about the shape and size of the car, how it drives on the road. Without that internal model, I think you'd crash pretty quick. The control system won't work right. So this is perfect. Attention, moving your attention around, is one of the most important things that the brain does. Therefore, by the principles of engineering, the brain should have an attention schema, a model or a description of that thing that it's trying to control. And there's one more, let's see, general representation, integration of information, control of attention. There's one more possible advantage to having an attention schema that I want to end with, and that is social cognition. Using an attention schema to model someone else's state of attention, in effect attributing awareness to someone else as well as to oneself. Now, we think this is very important. If you're a zebra, you want to know, is that lion aware of me? And so this could have come in very early in evolution, but we think that it probably expanded radically in human evolution. And we people, as I said at the beginning, we people have a tendency to attribute awareness to everything, to other people, to pets, to inanimate objects, to the spaces around us. And in my lab, we have focused on networks in the brain that are involved in social thinking, in attributing mind states to other people. And I'll tell you about one brain area, very briefly, that has been a focus of our research. This is a scan of my own brain, by the way. I don't actually have a red spot. But this area, the temporoparietal junction, is a node. It's a central node in a brain-wide network that seems to be involved in processing the mind states of other people, in attributing emotions and thoughts and awareness to other people. And what interests us about this area is when it gets damaged, it doesn't just take away your ability to attribute awareness to others. It takes away your own awareness of things around you as well. When this area gets damaged, it causes something called neglect, hemispatial neglect. Damage to one side causes a loss of awareness of everything on the other side of space. So you eat the food on one side of your plate and you think you're done. and somebody rotates your plate and you don't know where the extra food came from. But you can still see over there. If someone throws a ball, you'll duck. You just won't know why. You can process stuff over there. You just can't attach the property of awareness to it. So maybe this part of the brain, here's data that I won't have time to tell you about the experiment, but this part of the brain, active in association with awareness, active when you look at someone else and judge whether that person is aware of items next to him, maybe that part of the brain is involved in building this construct of awareness. Maybe it is a node in a larger network. You see some of that network. That network probably has many different functions, but one function may be to compute information about consciousness, about what consciousness is, about what its properties are, about who is conscious of what. And so, by hypothesis, if that area and that whole network were damaged or taken out on both sides, you would have a zombie, a person who does not understand what consciousness is and can no longer answer any questions about it. That's just a summary slide. And let's see what we have. Oh, I think Kevin must have slipped that slide in for his own benefit. But I will end on that summary slide, and I'm happy to take a few questions if there are any, and depending on time.